you gotta watch where you sit, everybody. Can't sit 50 near Ja Rule. You can't sit Jay-Z near Nas. Everybody gotta watch out for. You got the Olsen twins over there, so then you gotta put R. Kelly way up there.
Nobody humiliates celebrities quite like Chris Rock. One joke sent Jude Law storming out of the 2005 Oscars, while Sean Penn tried to defend him on live TV and looked ridiculous doing it. Jeff Bezos was told his check might bounce, Jennifer Lopez was told to thank her backside, and Kevin Hart got roasted at his own tribute. By the time the room realizes how brutal the joke was, Chris has already moved on to the next one. How does he keep embarrassing the most powerful people in the world to their faces? And why do they keep inviting him back anyway? Join us as we uncover how Chris Rock gets away with it. The thing that made him different from the start. There is a specific thing Chris Rock does that no other comedian working at his level has been willing to do with the same consistency across the same span of time. It is not the observation. Every stand-up comedian observes. It is not even the timing, though the timing is exceptional. It is the willingness to complete the transaction, to say the truth about the specific famous person who is sitting in the room right now, while they are sitting there, while the cameras are rolling, and then move on as if nothing unusual just happened. Most comedians who work celebrity material do it from a safe distance. The target is not present. If the joke misfires, the comedian retreats behind the position that it was just a joke, the target releases a statement, and the whole thing dissolves into the churn of the entertainment press within 48 hours. Chris works in the opposite direction. He prefers the target to be present. The presence of the target is what converts a gag into an event. Jude Law sitting in the Dolby Theater while Chris asks the room who he is and why he is in every film simultaneously is different from Jude Law hearing about the joke later. The sitting in the room version is the one that stays with you. Chris knows this. It is the entire architecture of the method. What makes it extraordinary is that Chris does it at every level and in every format. He does it at the Oscars in front of 40 million people. He does it on David Letterman's couch while Letterman himself becomes the material. He does it in a room with Jeff Bezos and Steve Martin, where Bezos is sitting close enough to make eye contact.
Jeff Bezos is here.
Oh!
Jeff Bezos.
Wow, great actor.
He does it at Kevin Hart's tribute ceremony while Hart's wife is watching. The room and target changes, but the willingness to complete the transaction never does. Chris was 17 years old when he first performed at a comedy club in Manhattan, driving in from Brooklyn with whoever's car was available. Eddie Murphy saw him at the comic strip in 1987 and put him in Beverly Hills Cop 2. Saturday Night Live came in 1990, where he built the character Nat X, a parody of a BET host whose entire function was to say what Black Americans were thinking about white media directly to the white people who ran it. He was dropped from the cast in 1993. He spent 2 years performing nightly in clubs, building material, and returned to the national stage in 1996 with an HBO special called Bring the Pain, which won 2 Emmys and a Grammy and established the method everyone has been watching him use ever since. The method has many moving parts. What it produces, every time, is the same result. The target leaves the room having heard something true said about them in front of the maximum possible number of witnesses. So what does that look like in practice? And who were the first celebrities to find out how it feels to be in the room when Chris decides it is their turn? Jennifer Lopez, Stevie Wonder, and the art of the compliment that isn't. The 1999 VMAs gave Chris a stage and Jennifer Lopez in the audience, and he used both with the specific efficiency of a man who had been waiting his whole career for exactly this combination of circumstances. He introduced her as Jennifer Lopez, confirmed she had arrived with 2 limousines, one for her and one for her ass, and then pivoted into what sounded, on the surface, like a sincere complaint on her behalf. He told her she did not thank her ass enough. He watched her accept awards and thank her mother, her father, and her acting coach, and he pointed out that she was crediting the wrong people. The ass was the star of the show. The ass deserved its own acceptance speech. Jennifer was just the chaperone.
That's right, Jennifer Lopez here tonight. Jennifer Lopez. That's right.
The joke worked on multiple levels simultaneously, which is how Chris's best material always works. On the surface, it was a crude observation about a famous woman's physical appearance. Underneath that, it was a structural argument about how celebrity gets constructed, and how the thing that makes a person famous is almost never the thing they receive credit for. Lopez was not going to stand up and dispute it. The room laughed. The cameras caught the laugh. The clip is still running on the internet 26 years later. The same year, at a White House party that Chris attended alongside Charles Barkley and Jay-Z, Stevie Wonder took the stage after Herbie Hancock and began performing with what Chris described as extra blind in it, the theatrical helplessness of a man who had been to the White House more times than most presidents, who knew exactly where everything was, and who was performing disorientation as a kind of artistry. The observation was at once affectionate and devastating. Wonder could not dispute it. The people who had been in that room with Chris knew it was accurate the moment they heard it. The people who had not been in that room felt like they had been when Chris finished describing it. This is the specific quality that separates Chris from comedians who simply mock famous people. The observation is always about something real. It is not a punchline constructed around the target's name and attached to a generic joke structure. It is a specific, accurate, verifiable observation of how the target actually behaves, which means the target cannot deny it without looking worse than they did before the denial. When Chris appeared on David Letterman's Late Show, and Letterman arrived with no voice, Chris did not politely ignore it. He pointed at the voice and said, "Things are going bad, huh?" He noted that Letterman was a rich man who could simply go home. He suggested that Letterman's wife was still mad at him and that staying in Connecticut with a mean woman was a worse option than staying in the studio with no voice. Letterman laughed throughout and appeared to genuinely enjoy it because the jokes were accurate and because Chris had done something that Letterman's own writers were not going to do: treat the host like a civilian instead of an institution. And then there was Eminem. Chris explained, in what became one of his most quoted bits, exactly why no rapper was going to say anything negative about Eminem. Too many things rhymed with Chris. Eminem did not even like his own mother, and his records were going to be on every station, including the country station and the talk station. It was not a roast. It was a declaration of surrender dressed as a compliment, and Eminem was the one person in American entertainment who had genuinely earned the immunity. So who else got the treatment? And what happens when the room is full of people who all know they might be next? P. Diddy, the goddess, and the jokes that got better with age. The 2003 MTV VM has put Chris on a stage and gave him P. Diddy as subject matter, and Chris used the opportunity to describe Making the Band, Diddy's reality show in which he mentored aspiring musicians, as the best show on television, specifically because of the mentorship dynamic. Who better than Puff Daddy, Chris asked the room, to show children right from wrong? The fatherly advice on offer included guidance on which gun went with which shoes. The audience laughed. Diddy was in the building. The clip aired on MTV.
Puffy got a new album. Can't talk about music without talking about Puffy. I know I may get my ass whooped for this, but who gives it? Who don't care?
In 2024, with everything the public now knows about Sean Combs and the federal charges against him, that clip is a different viewing experience entirely. Chris had not predicted the future. He had observed the present with enough accuracy that when the future arrived, it retroactively confirmed everything he had said. That is what happens when the joke is built on a real foundation rather than a performed one. It does not expire. The Gotti family got similar treatment around the same period, when Chris expressed genuine confusion about the existence of Growing Up Gotti, a reality show following the grandchildren of organized crime boss John Gotti, and asked what network executive had looked at the Gotti situation and decided the murderer guy's children deserved a television platform. He asked what sponsors were advertising on the show. He asked whether O.J. Simpson would get one next. The joke landed on the absurdity of true crime celebrity, on the specific American tendency to extend the entertainment apparatus to people whose primary credential was proximity to violence, and on the gap between what the network said it was doing and what it was obviously doing. None of the Gotti family responded publicly. The observation stood. Janet Jackson and Jermaine Dupri were together at the time, and Chris described their relationship as a sale you find out about a day too late. Jackson was a 10. Jermaine was a 4. The 6-point differential was the kind of gap that made men who had loved Janet Jackson their entire lives realize they had all had a shot, that the access they had assumed was impossibly restricted was, in fact, available to a 4. The joke was nominally about the couple, but actually about the audience, about the fantasy that celebrity relationships operate on a different level of desirability than the rest of life, and about what it does to that fantasy when the evidence suggests otherwise. At the 2016 Oscars, with Sylvester Stallone sitting in the audience, Chris described Creed, the Rocky spin-off in which Michael B. Jordan played the son of Apollo Creed, as Black Rocky, and pointed out that the Rocky franchise had always been a science fiction property because it depicted a world in which white athletes were competitive with black athletes. Things that happen in Star Wars, he said, are more believable than things that happen in Rocky. Stallone was in the seat. The statement was on camera. The argument was accurate and verifiable by anyone with access to professional boxing statistics from any decade of the 20th century. Stallone had created a franchise whose entire premise had always been the premise Chris was now describing out loud. Nobody in the room could dispute it without disputing boxing history. And Cynthia Erivo was in the building when Chris noted that she had done such a great job in Harriet, in which she played Harriet Tubman, who hid black people from slave catchers, that the Academy had hired her to hide all the black nominees. He asked whether Eddie Murphy was under the stage. He expressed his appreciation for Murphy's work in Dolomite Is My Name. The joke landed on the Oscars' So White controversy, on the specific irony of an institution attempting to resolve its diversity problem by nominating a black woman whose primary role was hiding black people, and on the fundamental absurdity of the whole situation. Erivo received a Best Actress nomination. Chris received a standing ovation from a room that could not decide whether to be offended or delighted and settled on both. But what happens when the target is not a single person, but an entire institution, and Chris decides to say what everyone in the room has been thinking since before they sat down? The Oscars monologues. The Academy Awards invited Chris to host in 2005 and again in 2016, and both times he treated the invitation as permission to say the things that nobody else with access to that stage and that audience was willing to say. The distinction between Chris hosting the Oscars and any other comedian hosting the Oscars is not a distinction of talent. It is a distinction of intention. Most hosts arrive to celebrate the room. Chris arrives to describe it. In 2005, the room was full of the usual suspects, and Chris arrived with specific things prepared for specific people. Tobey Maguire got called a boy in tights. George W. Bush got the Gap analogy. If you worked the register at the Gap and came up $70 trillion short, you would have been fired, and Bush had kept his job through 2 terms of the same arithmetic. Michael Moore, whose Fahrenheit 9/11 had been in theaters for months.
Fahrenheit 11/9. That's the name of the new documentary by Oscar-winning filmmaker Michael Moore.
Was told he would have been better served making a documentary about the subject he had done his research on most clearly, his own dietary habits. Nicole Kidman was credited with delivering the greatest performance at the ceremony, not on screen, but in the audience, when she smiled through the entire presentation after losing Best Actress, an Emmy-worthy performance of graciousness that no film that year could match. And then there was Jude Law. Law had appeared in 6 films in the previous 12 months. Chris looked at the room and asked who Jude Law was and why he was in every movie. He said Law was what you got when you wanted Tom Cruise but could not book him. He said that even though Law was not acting in credited for making cupcakes, he said the following year Law would be playing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He kept going. Law, sitting in the audience, laughed at first and then stopped laughing. And the moment when Law stopped laughing was visible on camera and was discussed by entertainment reporters for the following 2 days. Sean Penn walked to the microphone to present Best Actress and used his presentation time to announce, with complete seriousness, that Jude Law was one of the finest actors working in Hollywood. The announcement had nothing to do with the award being presented. Everyone in the room understood it had nothing to do with the award being presented. Penn's intervention made the Jude Law joke more famous than it would have been if everyone had laughed and moved on, because a formal public defense delivered before 40 million people is the strongest possible confirmation that the original attack hit somewhere real. Chris had moved on before Penn reached the microphone. Penn was still dealing with a joke that was already over. The Academy removed the Jude Law section from the YouTube upload, which is as clean an institutional admission as any organization ever makes. Clips that do not hit anything do not get removed. The 2016 ceremony required a different approach because the target was not a single person, but the institution itself. Chris walked out to Public Enemy's Fight the Power and called the ceremony the White People's Choice Awards in his opening sentence. He pointed out that if they had nominated hosts, he would not have gotten the job, and the audience would have been watching Neil Patrick Harris. He noted that Jada Pinkett Smith had called for a boycott of a ceremony she had not been invited to, a kind of observation difficult to dispute without confirming it. He told the room that their ancestors had problems too large to notice the Oscars. He made them all laugh, and the construction was tight enough that laughing did not excuse them from the argument. The laugh was the acceptance of the point. Chris designed both outcomes simultaneously. So what happens when the stage is smaller and the target is sitting close enough to make eye contact? Jeff Bezos, Kevin Hart, and the roast that finds you wherever you are. In 2020, at a live Hollywood event, Chris shared the stage with Steve Martin and looked out at the audience to find Jeff Bezos in attendance.
Chris Rock and Steve Martin, who have both hosted the Oscars before, CEO Jeff Bezos was next on the chopping block.
He did not let the moment pass. He noted that Bezos had so much money that he had gotten divorced and was still the richest man in the world. He said Bezos had watched Marriage Story and thought it was a comedy. He turned to Steve Martin and asked if Martin had anything to add about Mr. Bezos. Martin said he liked getting his packages on time. The exchange lasted approximately 45 seconds. Bezos, the richest human being on the planet, sat in the audience and absorbed the observation that his divorce had been a financial event that most people would not survive and that he had processed it as entertainment. There was no available response. Chris had already turned back to the room. Kevin Hart has been a target at multiple points across Chris's career, and what makes the Hart material notable is that Chris has hit him across different formats, different years, and different levels of proximity. The observation that Hart is in everything, that sometimes Hart is in the trailer and not even in the movie, that Chris once thought he saw Hart playing a bush in a period film, is a structural joke about the same phenomenon Chris identified with Jude Law in 2005. Ubiquity as a quality that undermines the perception of value. Hart is everywhere. Being everywhere is not the same as being essential. The joke makes that argument without quite stating it, which is why Hart, who is one of the great roasters of the modern era, has never landed a clean response. The tribute ceremony roast was the most precise version of the Hart material because it was delivered in the room where it was least expected and most visible. Hart was being honored. The ceremony was in his name. Chris stood at the microphone and noted that Hart's best performance as an actor was in The Upside, a film in which Hart played a character with less money than Bryan Cranston's character, because Hart had to act as if he had never seen a Ferrari before. The implication was that this was the performance of Hart's career precisely because it required him to play the furthest thing from his actual life. Hart's wife was in the room. Hart was in the room. Chris delivered the argument and sat down. Michael Strahan got it on Good Morning America. Chris called him the hardest worker he knew while standing next to him on live television, and then noted that Strahan walked out of Garbage Men to get to that level of industry, implying that the energy Strahan brought to morning television was the energy of a man who had survived worse conditions and was applying survival instincts to breakfast programming. Strahan thanked him. The camera caught both of them. Chris had already moved to the next observation. And Rick Ross, who is also a working musician with his own celebrity apparatus, received the most compressed version of the treatment. Dre got beats, Ross got diabetes, and Chris suggested Ross would be the first rapper to die of breast cancer. The joke took 11 words. The logic was airtight. Ross has not publicly responded in a way that improved his position. So what happens when the targets are not celebrities from the entertainment world, but the most powerful figures in business, politics, and the news cycle, and Chris decides they are all fair game in the same monologue? Jesse Smollett, Trump, Musk, and the targets who handed him the material. The late SNL appearance in 2024 gave Chris a platform that is reserved, in theory, for sitting politicians and cultural figures of unusual moment, and he used the opening monologue to address the Trump election win.
Donald Trump has won the state. The winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president.
The Menendez brothers' potential release, and Elon Musk in a sequence that demonstrated something important about how Chris operates when the material is recent. The jokes are faster, the connections are tighter, and the structural analysis of what just happened is more accurate than most political commentary published in the same week. Trump had survived an assassination attempt, won the presidency, won the popular vote, and been named Times Person of the Year. Chris noted all 4 facts and said it could not happen to a nicer guy. The construction worked because the tone and content of the sentence pointed in opposite directions simultaneously, and the gap between them contained the entire argument. He moved directly to the Menendez brothers, newly eligible for potential release, and noted the timing. Out of jail, just in time to get deported, in a political environment where deportation was the headline policy. The connection between 2 apparently unrelated news stories, drawn in a single sentence, is the comedic equivalent of a well-constructed legal brief. Musk came next, described as the #1 African in the world, the richest African American, except that the American part required some examination. Chris noted that Musk had more children than the Cleveland Browns had functional players, and that nobody knows how to get rid of people like a South African. Both observations were verifiable, and neither contained a word that Musk could dispute without confirming the underlying argument. The bit ran for 40 seconds. It covered more ground than most cable news segments on Musk cover in 12 minutes. Jesse Smollett lost his pronoun in Chris's material, which is a specific kind of dismissal that operates differently from a direct insult. Chris announced that Smollett would no longer be referred to as Jesse from that point forward, just Smollett, with no first name, because the first name was a form of respect that the situation had not earned. He observed that Smollett's light skin and curly hair were being wasted. He did not engage with the details of the situation. He simply withdrew the respect of the full name and moved on, which landed harder than any direct engagement with the facts would have. The Meghan Markle material in Selective Outrage noted that a woman intelligent enough to research the British royal family's history before agreeing to marry into it had no standing to be surprised at what the research predicted. The Kardashian material constructed a theological framework in which Robert Kardashian's sin of helping acquit O.J. Simpson had a specific divine punishment, that his daughters would date nothing but volatile men for the remainder of recorded time. Both arguments were delivered live on Netflix, with no safety net and no possibility of post-production editing. Both have held up under subsequent review of the facts. So, after 30 years of doing this to everyone from Jennifer Lopez to Jeff Bezos to the entire Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, what makes the room keep letting him in? The question of why other comedians do not use Chris's method has a straightforward answer: the relationships. The entertainment industry is a small ecosystem in which the people who decide who works and who does not are largely the same ones in the room when Chris decides it is their turn. Calling Law a product of industry overexposure, while Law is sitting in the front row, is not a risk that most comedians who want to keep working in Hollywood are willing to take. Describing Jeff Bezos' divorce as a financial comedy, while Bezos is close enough to make eye contact, is a risk most hosts wouldn't take at an industry event where their next project might depend on relationships in that room. Chris takes the risk every time. What is remarkable is how consistently the risk resolves in his favor. So, who's next on Chris's list? And how far will Chris Rock go to make the world face the truth, one joke at a time? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video on your screen.